Hello again. Welcome to another edition of Media Watch. I'm your co-host, Eric Tait.
I'm Bob Anthony.
And I'm Alan Singer.
Dr. Alan Singer, educated historian, regular on Media Watch, helping us put things into perspective. And I mean, there's just so much crap that keeps coming out of or we can't keep track of it. We just try to put some of it in perspective. We're doing this the Wednesday before our Monday air, being brought to you by the good graces of Manhattan, EVT Educational Productions, Zoom, and hopefully will air on Manhattan Neighborhood Network on its cable access outlets next Monday, if we're lucky. Today is May 21st. Is that correct, guys?
Yes, and we'll air on the 26th.
Okay. And we'll put it up on YouTube and a couple of other platforms. But call Media Watch, and there are a couple of breaking media stories that just popped into my inbox. I think, Bob, you've seen them as well. CBS News president of news and their own stations, I believe McMahon or something to that name, close to the name of the education.
Actually, it's Wendy McMahon.
Wendy McMahon was forced out or quit because she, just like Bill Owen, the executive producer of 60 Minutes, said, I can't deal with the interference that's going on from our corporate parent, Paramount. So he quit, and the corporate Paramount people didn't like the fact that she backed his resignation. So theoretically, they forced her out. And that's all because Sumner Redstone's daughter, what's her name? Shari Redstone, who is the main shareholder at Paramount, wants to get her merger with some Skydance or some Hollywood studio. And
Skydance, correct.
the FCC may not approve that. Donald Trump doesn't like what's going on. And egregiously, she's also talking about settling his bogus suit against 60 Minutes for something like $30 million. A suit that everybody who knows any legal anything says is just a frivolous BS attempt to extort money, which is, what do we got? The guy in the White House is an extortionist, grifter, convicted felon anyway, so we shouldn't be surprised. But that's one of the key media stories that's out there. And Bob, what's the other one? A merger between which two?
Between Charter Communications and Cox, two major cable brands, and they provide a lot of internet access, mobile access. It's a major combination of communications companies, and there are some news properties involved in it. So I hadn't dug into it deeply, but it's a major change, and it's a major. Sorry,
more consolidation.
more consolidation. Yeah.
Yeah.
More consolidation, fewer independent voices.
Mhm.
It's going on in radio, it's going on in newspapers. We are losing, just to give an idea, Newsday on Long Island. Everything other than local news is now just the AP. We're losing independent coverage all over the place.
Yeah, which is why we make note of yet another merger that probably will get approved by this administration and this FCC. I'm not going to make book on it. They might surprise us and say that's not in the best interest of our viewing public and our, quote, media consumers, but I don't think they're going to go down that road. I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong, but so much for that. But speaking of media coverage, there was an interesting media coverage of a story that I saw last week that you guys can fill me in more on. But I saw something about some refugees from South Africa, and I put refugees in quote, Afrikaners being rescued from their oppression by being flown into the United States in some charter plane. Don't ask me who paid for the charter plane and how they got designated as refugees, but give us some more background on that, guys. The Afrikaner refugee, quote, refugees that got summarily, easily flown into the U.S.
Go ahead, Alan.
Up until 1990, South Africa was an apartheid society where 85% of the population, which were African, were governed by a coalition of English and formerly Dutch whites. And then, it was a campaign led by Nelson Mandela and international movements of people for boycotting South Africa, supporting majority rule. Now, the agreement that allowed majority rule in South Africa also permitted the Afrikaner and the British whites to hold on to all the land and their wealth. So Black South Africans remain largely poor, and white South Africans, a small minority, are quite affluent. Even families on welfare have Black servants amongst the white areas. But there have been people who said, this is ridiculous. Why do we let him keep all the wealth? So there have been some movements in South Africa challenging that.
They own 90% of the land, if I remember correctly. The statistics.
Right. So Trump has decided
Afrikaners own 90% of the land.
Yeah. So Trump has decided that this constitutes genocide against white South Africans, which is outrageous, and took about 80 people as white refugees to the United States while cutting off all other refugees coming into the country. Now, today, while we're actually on air, Trump is meeting with the president of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, I believe is how he pronounces his name. And what Trump did is he pulled with Zelensky, where he ambushed the guy, and he throws up a video which Trump claims demonstrates genocide. And Ramaphosa is looking at this and says, "That's not South Africa. I've never seen that place before." And then he has handouts. He just makes all sorts of wild claims, but they're all done for TV sound bites.
Exactly, Alan. And this was a TV moment. He had no interest in actually having a conversation with the president of South Africa. This was his chance to justify what he did with that plane load of Afrikaners. And as you said, the president of South Africa didn't recognize the video that was shown at the meeting. So, the refugee status of this group of people was, I don't want to say sped up. It was like jet speed sped up, because usually it takes years to, get approved, then get brought over. This took what, weeks? We've never seen anything this fast. There are people who are waiting who have approved refugee status, including those Afghans who helped the U.S. but can't get over here, who haven't been able to get here. But this group was expressed here on charter jets, and Trump said, well, they happen to be white. The visuals speak to white supremacists as to, you'll be protected. That's how I take it. But we'll shut the door against everyone else.
I think there's an underlying issue here too. Trump has been attacking DEI, and he's been attacking any sort of history that points out the blemishes of the United States, the racism, the slavery, the ongoing discrimination. And what Trump is trying to do is to create a new narrative and say, see, there's prejudice against white people. DEI and affirmative action, that's all prejudice against white people. And we're going to end all this prejudice against white people. And that the South African maneuver is part of that campaign to rewrite the past. White people are the real victims here.
But tell me which Afrikaners helped the United States in Afghanistan while they were losing their country. Tell me which Afrikaners risked their lives by assisting the United States in trying to fight off the Taliban. And those Afghan refugees, some of whom already had approved visas, some of whom were already here on temporary protected status, or whatever you call the phrase, they have rescinded that, killed the visas for those people. And those are people, if they get sent back to Afghanistan, which these people are planning to do, they will die. They will be hunted and killed by the Taliban. But he's going to bring Afrikaner, apartheid, racist, white supremacists, I don't know whether we can call them pigs or whatever, but those are the people who practice apartheid against Black, brown, Indians, colored, whatever they want to name them, back in South Africa. And he gives them a carpet ride in, a chartered plane. and, quote, had the gall to call them refugees and put them at the head of the line, while people who risk their lives for us, fighting the longest damn war this country has ever fought. And that's just one example of the people who should be welcomed here, who they are kicking out, are stopping from coming in. I can't tell you how angry I am, not just at the apartheid people getting it, but at the folks who risk their lives for us not getting the same status and same red carpet treatment. I am just, as a vet who risks for this country, to see people who risk their lives for this country treated like that, while these white Afrikaners get this treatment, it's beyond the pale as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, that's this administration. Speaking of which, this administration now seems to be following another Project 25 playbook. Is that a segue that we can make about what's going on within the structure? Because we need to go from all those other black and brown people. The Palestinians in Gaza are brown people, correct?
Absolutely.
I mean, I'm just off the top of my head, just geographically, Palestinians in Gaza are brown people. Is that why Donald Trump and his people decide they're going to let Israel do what they're doing? The humanitarian crisis in Gaza is now beyond the pale. What did the European Union just decide to do because of the Israelis and what how they're treating these people? Bob, you've got some stuff on that. What's going on in Gaza, and why did the Europeans do what they did?
Well, I mean, right now, Israel, well, Netanyahu, and I try to be specific on that. Netanyahu and his government are accelerating the war. They're raising the level of the war in Gaza, and they've still prevented aid from getting in. So, I mean, even though he's under pressure from other countries globally to do so, I mean, no aid is getting in. They've had a few videos at the border of trucks lined up, just can't get in. The European Union has an economic agreement with Israel, and part of that agreement deals with human rights and humanitarian rights, etc. And apparently 17 of the 27 members of the European Union are considering sanctions against Israel because of their escalation of the war, because of their lack of allowing food and medicine into the region. And even people on the ground were saying nobody's getting food, and that includes the hostages. So it's a horrible condition, and the European Union, unlike the U.S., which is apparently giving the Netanyahu government a pass, is telling them that there will be economic sanctions against trade sanctions against Israel if this keeps up. I don't know how much muscle they can leverage, but it's part of the pressure that's being applied globally by the EU and others.
Alan, what are we seeing about that humanitarian crisis? What have been the reports by some of the folks at the UN speaking to the fact? I saw a report on I think it was PBS 2 days ago, where either PBS or one of my NPR radio broadcasts, where they were talking about the fact that babies were so starved they didn't even have the energy to cry. That there's
it's a famine.
It's a famine that's hitting the youngest and the weakest in Gaza. And the fact that Israel is about to escalate the war is going to make that situation even worse. And the fact that they have shut the gate, I think they let in 15 trucks 2 days ago to supposedly feed a population of 2.5 million or whatever. It's just the most horrendous, ridiculous.
Yeah. It's like sending a pizza into Yankee Stadium. I mean, that's not even hyperbole. That's basically the scale of the aid they're letting in.
It's a human-induced famine, and that is a war crime, and that is an act of genocide. And we've labeled it when it happened in Ireland. We labeled it when it happened in Ukraine, and it's happening here, and it's happening now. I know in the Senate there's a bill that's being debated over whether the weakest kind of milquetoast bill, you're complaining that Israel shouldn't starve the population of Gaza.
Wow.
And even that has about 40 out of the 100, most of it, it's not likely to pass.
Wow.
So what's the other thing that's happening, and this is happening in the United States right now, this is very concerning. The Heritage Foundation, which is like the right-wing think tank, though I don't like to accuse them of thinking, that created Project 2025, also has something called the Esther Project. I think it's the Esther Project.
Yes.
Esther was in the story of Purim, was a princess in Persia who saves the life of the local Jewish population. They called it the Esther Project. And what they're doing is they've invented something called the Hamas Support Network. It doesn't exist. And anybody who questions what Israel is doing is accused of being a member of this fictional support network. And ironically, most of the people behind this Esther Project are not Jewish. And a lot of the people they are attacking are Jewish. And this idea that there's somehow secret Hamas support network is now spilling over into local politics, which I think we'll get to in a few minutes.
Yeah, the background on this Esther project, I just came across this article, and it's in the quote, fake media, fake rag, the New York Times. And I put the fake rag in quotes because we understand that the New York Times and the Washington Post and a lot of mainstream media have their failings, but they do pretty decent journalism most of the time. And so I came across this article by a young lady in the New York Times. Katie something or other. I should have marked it, but basically she did a deep dive into the Esther Project, and it comes out of the Heritage Foundation, as you said, same people who brought us Project 2025, and it was a design playbook to destroy the pro-Palestinian movement in this country from the ground up and to the hallowed halls of the universities. And all this bit about sending visas from foreign students, it's been about cutting off funds from universities like Harvard, Yale, Penn, all these places. All this is part of that playbook that they drew up under the Esther Project. And the Trump administration and all these assault that you're seeing is straight out of that playbook. What we have said here right now about what Israel is doing in Gaza, that would put us right on the Hamas Support Network list of the Project Esther people, okay? So I kid you not, folk, you're seeing us say something that's antithetical to what Israel is doing to the Palestinians in Gaza. We have just become, quote, part of the Hamas Support Network, even though it doesn't exist and that's not where we come from, but that's the playbook. And as you said, Alan, let's pick up on the fact that not only have they been so successful at doing that across the country, right here in New York, that has one of the widest, most cosmopolitan global population, that's not what our politicians are appealing to in this current mayoral primary. Talk to us, Alan, about what's going on by these candidates that's right out of the Project Esther playbook.
Well, voters in New York has a very, especially in the Democratic primary, people with Jewish last names make up about 1/3 of the voters in the Democratic primary. Now, what has happened is Andrew Cuomo, who's running in that primary, and Eric Adams, who's going to be running as an independent, are making Israel and anti-Semitism a major issue in their campaign. Adams' campaign highlights his actions against anti-Semitism as mayor, his use of police to suppress campus protests, his support for an economic partnership with Israel. In November, Adams, because he's no longer a Democrat, will be running on an independent line called the End Anti-Semitism ballot. Now, Andrew Cuomo, who has a significant lead in the most early polls, calls the rise of anti-Semitism the most important issue in the race. and he labels support for insufficient support for Israel's actions in Gaza as anti-Semitic. And he's accused candidates like Brad Lander and Scott Stringer, who are both Jewish, of aiding and supporting the aggressive anti-Israel policies. Now, they've hit back and they've said that, Cuomo is just using this Jews in Israel as a pawn in his campaign. The person who's been attacked the most is State Assembly member Zohran Mandani from Queens, who's also running, and he's trailing Cuomo, second place in the polls. He has not made Israel a major issue in his campaign. Mandani does oppose Netanyahu's right-wing government, and he accuses Israel of committing genocide in the Gaza war. But these are not the big issues in New York. But because of his position on Palestine and Israel, Cuomo has repeatedly implied that Mandani is a secret anti-Semite. And the subtext of the criticism, of course, is Mandani is a Muslim. So, and again, it's not just in the mayoral election. There was just a school board election this week in New Rochelle, and a highly qualified Afro-Latino woman who had a very good chance was defeated. And why? Because it was spread throughout the community and social media that she had a friendship with Jamal Bowman. And so, guilt by association, Bowman was defeated in his Democratic primary for Congress because he opposed Israeli policies. So how could this woman be on our school board? She's part of the Hamas Support
Network. Yes, right. So the project.
No, but you're right, Alan. And when you look at the other people trailing in the polls in the mayoral race, they're all hitting upon actual city issues. Mondani, Adams,
the other Adams.
Tilson, Lander.
You mentioned Adams, but make sure you let folks know the other Adams.
Adrian Adams, City Council President Adrian Adams. You're right. I need to be specific there. But they're actually hitting upon city-related topics when they campaign. But that's not what sells. You're right, Alan. Right now, this anti-Semitism stuff sells, and it grabs attention.
Yeah. But you know what I'm thinking, and here's my advice to Carolyn Adams, okay, City Council President.
Adrian,
right, because I know another Adams named Carolyn, and former journalist, or probably still a journalist. But anyway, I'm conflating.
There's this guy named Adam who's in the Bible too.
Yes.
Adrian Adams needs to launch a pushback campaign saying, I am not the Adams that Trump pardoned. I'm not the Adams that got all those potential charges for nefarious behavior thrown out of court by the Justice Department. I'm the Adams that actually works for you, not possibly might be a convicted felon because nobody's filed any charges against me. She needs that kind of campaign just to differentiate herself from the other guy who actually is now the incumbent trying desperately to hold on to his office.
But I think that the Trump administration just gave the election to Andrew Cuomo, by the way. They have started an investigation of Cuomo because of his testimony before Congress during the COVID pandemic, and they're claiming that he wasn't truthful, and they want to investigate and bring him up on charges. And now Cuomo can run for mayor as the anti-Trump candidate. It was like a gift.
Yes.
That's why I'm saying the other Adams should co-opt that line by saying, I'm not that Adams. This is the Adams that's going to be fighting against that guy in Washington and fighting for you. Don't let Cuomo get that by default. That's my advice to her, but who knows?
All right, and we have about 3 minutes left. The bad news for us and the good news for the candidates is that the matching funds are just becoming available to a lot of them. So we'll see a lot more commercials, which is bad for us because we got to watch the damn things. But anyway, we have about 2.5 minutes left.
Two and a
Well,
half minutes.
people,
Let's
we
just
need
do
to
a
remind people about how the election works and the dates.
no.
Because,
You know why? We've done too much on local, just New York stuff.
okay,
Let's tag with the craziness that's happening in DC,
all right.
specifically the fact that the Trump people are actually Justice Department that's supposed to be looking out for justice impartially. They're now in negotiations to pay $5 million to the Babbitt woman's family, the woman who tried to assault our House of Representative members on the January 6th riot, tried to break through that door and got shot for trying to do stuff like that. And her family filed a lawsuit against the government in a wrongful death move, and we're asking for 30 million, if not more. And now the Justice Department said they might actually settle with that family for $5 million. Any comments on that?
Since I don't know, since when do we pay criminals? But go ahead, Alan.
No, everything that's coming out of there is crazy. Chrissy Noem, who's the Secretary of Homeland Security, was testifying on Congress, Senate. And Senator Hassan from, I think it's New Hampshire, asked her, do you know what habeas corpus is? And she said, oh, yeah, that's what gives Trump the right to deport people. And the Senate says, no. Habeas corpus is that the government has to have evidence and a court hearing before they can lock you up.
Oh,
They have no idea. And
no
then
idea. Yeah.
what is your just about the white elephant Qatari airplane?
Oh, right. As of today, and we have about a minute left, the Defense Department officially accepted the gift of the whatever $400 million Qatari airplane, which actually they've been trying to unload for what 13 years.
The
But
white elephant, nobody
yes,
wanted to
white
take
elephant.
because it was
Yes,
so expensive to run. The same
yes.
white elephant is going to cost us about $1 billion to strip and refurbish to make it safe for an Air Force One mission. They've decided to accept that. Look, talk about graft, corruption, because supposedly he gets to keep that after he's out of office. The emoluments clause just got kicked down the road, kicked out of it, but he kicked it down the road, kicked it into oblivion in the first administration. He just upped that by tenfold in the new administration. And with that, we're probably out of time.
Yes, yes.
Okay, folks, this has been Media Watch. I'm your co-host, Eric Tait.
I'm Alan Singer.
And I'm Bob Anthony. Catch up to us on YouTube at Media Watch EVT.
We miss Raymond today because he's still under the weather, but hopefully he'll be with us the next time. Folks, stay safe, and we'll catch you the next time.